for the rest of us with Bandon Handley. Because you're already great at everything else, why not fatherhood too?
4, 3, 2, 1. Hey there, fatherhood for the rest of us. This is Bandon Handley, and I am on today with Hunter Clarke Fields, who is a mindfulness mentor, coach, and she is also the host of Mindful Mama podcast and the creator of Mindful Parenting course. She coaches moms on how to cultivate mindfulness in their daily lives. Hunter has over 20 years of experience in meditation and yoga practices and has taught mindfulness to thousands worldwide. She is also the mother of 2 active daughters who challenge her every day to hone her craft. Find out more about Hunter at mindfulmamamentor.com and right here on Fatherhood for the Rest of Us. Fathers and mamas, right? We don't get too many mamas on the Fatherhood for the Rest of Us podcast, but when you and I connected at the podcast movement, one of the things that we talk about here on Fatherhood for the Rest of Us quite often is mindfulness, your mindset, and all that stuff. And you triggered me to come up to you because you'd mentioned mindfulness at the session we were at while we were watching Angus Nelson. And so I said, hey, let's have a conversation. Thank you. So I just said, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's see where it goes. Because, as parents all kind of need a little bit of help with mindfulness, and it's always good to get a mother's perspective as well. Because it's there's 2 of us involved most oftentimes. Yeah. So before we even get started with all that, can you tell me something that is, I don't know, exciting in your life, something that you're celebrating today, anything?
Well, I just recorded an episode of the Mindful Mama podcast right before this, and I was excited to. I'm writing a book, and I just am revealing the title of the book, which is something that has been gone back and forth a lot. So I'm super excited about it. It's called Raising Good Humans, and that is what's truly exciting me right now. Is just being able to share the title, Raising Good Humans, and that's it. That's what I'm kind of lit up about. And then tomorrow I'm going to the Renaissance Fair with my kids.
Nice. That'll be fun and awesome. Congratulations on the unveiling of the new title of the book.
Dun, 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 dun.
Fanfare, right? Fanfare. It just makes me laugh because you are going to the Renaissance Fair as well, which is where.
Oh yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
So 20 years of mindfulness. Let's talk a little bit about your journey. What, let's talk about it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I dove into this out of pure need. I was kind of an eclectic, eccentric kid, and I eclectic, eccentric parents. I guess I would say now that knowing what I know now, I would say I was definitely a highly sensitive kid. I'm a highly sensitive person, and one of those spirited children, and that was me. And I definitely would kind of be on this emotional roller coaster, like up and down and up and down. And I really even remember, I remember being like 10 years old, and I remember having my father, I had been crying. My father was rubbing my back. Actually, it was a really good fatherhood moment for him. He was good at that. He rubbed my back, and I was like, oh, I'm so sad. And he just told me, he said, Hunter, this is your artistic temperament, and life will always be this way. I was like, great, thanks. Actually, it wasn't very reassuring, obviously. But he was right. Like I'm a lot like him, and I really was on this roller coaster and would dip into these lows every couple of weeks, sometimes every week. And I would just feel like I couldn't handle life. And then I finally, so I started reading about mindfulness in the Buddhist tradition when I was a teenager, and I just kept reading and reading and learning more and more. And it would be sort of like this thing I would read before I went to bed at night that was reassuring, and it would help me feel better. And then finally, when I was 27, I was able to, I went and did a yoga teacher training, and I was able to finally actually sit my butt down and do the work and actually do the practice of meditation. And I kind of, I did it. I was diligent and I practiced. And after a couple of months, I was thinking like, gosh, this is not working for me. I just sit here, think the whole time, like this is not working at all. But then I looked back over my life and over those last 2 or 3 months, and I realized that I hadn't actually fallen into any of the dips that I fell into for my entire life. I hadn't fallen into them at all. And it was like a whole world opened up to me. I mean, it really was a game changer for me because it really changed. I mean, I was at such a level that just practicing meditation, and I did that for me, and I don't have those dips. I don't fall into those pits of despair on a regular basis the way I used to. It really opened things up and changed things for me.
Leveled you out.
Yeah, it really gave me that equanimity that is important for you to be able to take on what you need to take on in life.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. How are you? And so your children aren't that old yet, right? I mean, they're
11 and 8 years old right now.
11 and 8. Okay. So they're older than mine.
How old are your kids, Brandon?
Mine are, 6 and 8. So, what's funny is that it's just how often they change and how quickly they change. Just as soon as you think you got them figured out, like they are not the same person the next day. So I know that.
So true.
That even though they're not that far apart in age, that from 8 to 11, I'm expecting so many changes. Right.
It's huge. And there's kind of a beautiful, you're kind of in a sweet spot, Brandon, I would say. 8 and 11. Well, you may not think so, but then when you get to 11, oh boy, it's kind of like 3 all over again.
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. So I mean, it's just always changing, and you can't. So I just know that you've got more experience in terms of parenting than I do. Just even with just that 3 years delta, right? And that's just going to be so much more parenting, and you've been applying the mindfulness though this whole time, I'm guessing. When did it dawn on you that like you could integrate the mindfulness that you'd been using with the meditation with parenting?
Well, I thought parenting wise, I thought I was going to be so golden because I was pregnant and I was meditating with my meditation group. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have this amazing child. Parenting is going to be amazing because I'm just doing,
Right.
Right. And then, my daughter turned 2 and, she started responding to me. And I realized that, I needed to really double down on my mindfulness practice to help me lower my reactivity because I inherited some amazing, beautiful things from my father, but I also inherited some hardcore temper. And this temper just came out of me. It was frightening, and I was so reactive. So I really had to lower my reactivity. I had to take this, say, okay, I'm failing at this. This sucks. I'm doing way worse than I thought I would be doing at this, and I have to change it. And so I had to calm down, and then I had to figure out, then what do I say so as not to set off this 2-year-old, 3-year-old powder keg of a child. Right.
Right.
Yes. So
you keyed in on the reactiveness, right? And so what is the option if we don't react to something? What do we do?
Well, yeah, I mean, we tend to go through most things kind of on autopilot, would you say? I mean, a lot of things we tend to do on autopilot. So when our kids when we're reactive, that we're generally at our worst parenting because we're not being thoughtful about our responses. We're just reacting. We're just yelling, whatever it is. And the truth is that sometimes we tend to think that this is the fault of our child. If my child would do what I say or act a certain way and things like that, then I would feel better, which is kind of messed up if you think about it, because then we're putting all the power into our child's hands about how we feel, right? Like, so we have to take ownership of that. But then also part of it is saying like, okay, this is hard. We are wired to be reactive. We are wired to respond to threats, and our biology is seeing our child as a threat in this point. So we can't be kind of harsh and blaming ourselves for this, but we have to kind of look at this and say, well, what's really going on here? And how do I work with it so I can actually respond from that thoughtful part of my brain with empathy, with all those things that, you know, research has shown is so much more effective. The way we can respond in ways that are much more effective than screaming and yelling at our kids and threatening and ordering them, you know. But to be able to get there, we have to deal with our own biology first.
How do we do that?
Well, so we're reactive because we've got that reptilian brain, right? We evolved to survive. All our ancestors evolved to survive and react and to respond to threats immediately. And that means cutting off the thoughtful part of our brain, because we don't want to stop and say, should I run away from this animal? Or, whatever.
Right.
We want to just act in those moments. And that wiring to survive and to react that way, which is our stress response, our fight, flight, or freeze response, doesn't serve us in our parenting, because then we scream at our kid. So in order to be what's happening there literally is that the amygdala, that part of our brain, the lower part of our brain that evolved earlier, is cutting off access, literally short-circuiting the upper, more evolved part of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is where our thoughtfulness and our empathy and our verbal ability and all of the logic, creativity, all of those things kind of emanate from this prefrontal cortex part of the brain. And so the amygdala cuts that off. So that's our reactivity. It sucks. So how do we deal with that? Well, there are things we can do in the moment to kind of bring our body out of fight or flight, freeze. There's kind of like triage kind of things we can do. But what I teach in mindful parenting is mindfulness, because practicing mindfulness meditation has been proven by research to lower our reactivity, to help us. It actually lowers depression, lowers anxiety. But what is happening is, it's pretty amazing, is it's kind of changing the wiring in the brain. It actually shrinks the gray matter in the amygdala, that reptilian part of the brain, and actually grows the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. So as we practice being non-reactive with ourselves and our thoughts and all the stuff that happens just in our heads as we sit still and breathe, then we're kind of building a muscle of non-reactivity so that we can be more thoughtful when we're with our kids.
Right on. And, how long have you found that it takes someone to develop that muscle and report back to you that, hey, this is actually working? Or even what have you found for yourself?
Well, it really, really depends on the person, for sure. I mean, I do some like free trainings and things like that sometimes. And a lot of people report that within like a week, because they're intentional and they're paying attention and all of that stuff, they are actually less reactive. So that's pretty amazing. Research has shown with an intentional practice of like 20 minutes a day or so, you can literally find those changes in the brain in 8 weeks. But it kind of depends. Meditation is a dose-dependent activity. So it depends how much you practice. It's really great to practice a little bit every day and kind of build up from there. And it's kind of like anything, building any muscle. Like we wouldn't send our kid into the Little League World Series without ever sending them to practices and having quite a lot of practice, right? Mm-hmm. And so our Little League World Series is like the crazy freak out temper tantrum and screaming at us. And we can't expect ourselves to be non-reactive in that moment without kind of like a practice where we're building that muscle bit by bit. Just reading about tennis doesn't make you good at tennis. Just listening to a podcast about tennis doesn't make you good at tennis. It's something you have to.
There goes my tennis game. So I want to hit on this for a second. I think that it's important to understand that responsiveness, reactiveness, and responsiveness, we're not trying to make ourselves completely like wooden and non-responsive to our children. Is that we're still going to get mad. You may think about it though for a second and be like, should I get mad in this moment? And you may decide, no, I shouldn't get mad or upset in this moment, or be like, no, I'm really pissed at this moment, right? Like, I mean, you just make a conscious decision to direct your emotion. Is that kind of what we're looking at here? So I can react and be mad and not know that I'm doing it, or I can feel the surge coming and I'd be like, I am going to lose it, and be like, should I lose it? Should I trickle this, or should I trickle the rage, or should I let it out? Or, should I take a moment here and realize that I'm overreacting?
That's a really great question. 'Cause when we get to the point of like, when we're about to lose it, right? What mindfulness helps us do is start to recognize and acknowledge things as they're building up. So one thing we can do, like we teach in mindful parenting, is kind of stepping back. And we don't want to be like, you don't want to be like fake calm. Like your kids have amazingly good BS meters, and they're going to see right through that.
It's annoying, actually. It's like really annoying. Like, and not to interrupt, but I mean, my youngest is whistling all the time right now, and my oldest used to snap his thumbs like everywhere he went. We like started calling him Snappity Jones, but he whistles all the time. And I'm like, I love your whistling, but could you do it outside maybe, or whatever? And he goes, if you love my whistling, why are you asking me to stop? I'm like, fair enough.
Yeah. Good question. So as we can start to like acknowledge those moments as they're building up, we can start to say, like, what mindfulness teaches us to do is to sort of label, okay, like right now I'm thinking, I'm going to come back to my breath. Oh, right now I'm kind of noticing I'm feeling anxious. I'm going to just breathe with this. Right now I'm noticing some discomfort in my body, and so we're always kind of like noting what's happening and kind of just breathing and staying with that. So then as you're with your kiddo who's whistling and he's starting to drive you bananas, you can say to yourself, like, okay, this is kind of driving me crazy. I'm starting to get irritated, And so one of the things I teach in mindful parenting is we teach to acknowledge some of those things and label them and note them before they get to that point. So we say, it's cool that you can whistle. You really love it, but I'm starting to feel really irritated and I need some quiet. So you can start to say that before it gets to that point. But then when we get to that point of like, I'm about to lose it, if we can stop. So the practice of mindfulness is basically about helping us stop and recognize, right? That, for instance, there's getting a little space between sort of stimulus and response. And so, for instance, like if you're thinking to myself, this whistling is so annoying, I'm so irritated, right? You can have this thought, and that thought's kind of like a truth to you. But if you say to yourself, okay, I'm having a thought that I'm really irritated, like I'm thinking about how this is driving me crazy. And so do you see how you could say, right, like, I'm really irritated, or I'm having a thought that I'm really irritated. One is truth, one is perception, right? And so to just having that little bit of space can say, when we get to the point of losing it, we can say, okay, I'm really losing it. I'm having thoughts that my kid is an a-hole, or whatever we're thinking, right? Like we're thinking that.
Why won't that jerk stop whistling?
Yes, exactly. Like whatever we're thinking, like I'm having the thought of these things. And then we can what's beautiful about that is then we can make a choice on how to respond, right? We're not just moving on autopilot. We can then make a choice on how we respond. So hopefully then if we're in that moment of being triggered and we can pause if we can do it.
Right.
Then we can say, okay, what do I need to do to take care of my big feelings and not dump all my stuff on my kid? I need a break. For me, it's, babe, I need a break. I've got to go outside. I go put my hands on a rock and I take some sigh breaths,
Right.
and I try not to respond right in that moment as best I can.
Right.
And
So,
I don't do
like
it right all the time.
it sounds like you're throwing a tool out there. Tools, like one of your tools is to remove yourself from situation.
Absolutely. I know, like when we're learning about parenting, we're learning about like attachment, and we say, oh, we should be with our kids with all the different things. And that's wonderful if you can do it. But if you're about to lose it, like that's not so skillful. Like, yeah, if your child is safe,
right,
go take a break. Like I remember when my second daughter was younger, I remember putting her in her crib and closing her door, walking through my bedroom, closing my door, and going out on this little balcony off my bedroom and breathing. Right. And just taking that time, because even though I was leaving her in a moment that was difficult for her, it was a much more skillful choice than losing my, beep at her would have been.
Sure. And I think that the other thing that you mentioned here too is that when we're being reactionary, we're reacting to the things that are outside of us, and it sounds like being responsive is more of an internal game, right? Where we say, all right, this is all internal. These are my thoughts. I'm thinking that my child's making me crazy, and just kind of let it go.
Yeah, and generally we can't just, at least I know I can't just let it go. Like when that kind of energy of irritation arises, like I'm not quite enlightened enough yet to just let it go. Like I need to do something. I need to sigh breaths are a great one. I need to shake it out. Sometimes I'll just do a forward fold on the floor or go wash my face or something. Sure. To just move that energy out of the body. Take a moment for myself, that moment that you need to, to not lose it at your child, and then come back and say, okay, you're really upset about this. I was feeling really irritated. Kind of just talk about what's happening, acknowledge the truth of the situation. This is what's happening. Let's figure it out.
So you got like a pattern interrupt and a kind of a recap. Like, all right, listen, sorry about that moment, or here's what was happening in that moment. You may, the child's perception of what may have happened oftentimes isn't true, right? Like a lot of times they feel like it's them and they've done something, and you got to come back and be like, listen, I'll use an example. I just had a conversation with my youngest the other night. I said, Liam, I'm not upset with you, the person. I'm upset with the action that you did. I'm upset with, the words you said. You are fantastic. These are separate from you. So these actions that you are doing are separate from you. And I'm not upset with you, the person. Again, just trying to make that delineation and, also indicate that this is my reaction to the things that you're doing, right? And again, separating him from his actions, and also making sure that he doesn't feel like I'm lumping him in with, the whole thing, right? Or I'm upset with him. That type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important change in our language, right? Like, rather than, we always say, we kind of joke in our house, like that the cat, we'll be like, Boots, that's not a good choice right now.
Poor choices. Right. You didn't think that out, Boots. Yeah.
Yeah. Not a good choice. It's a bad cat. Bad choices.
Right on. So what have you got going on right now? I see that you've actually got some retreats going on your website that you offer parents. You've got some free courses. What are some things that we can offer fathers? And there are a couple mothers, I think, that tune into the podcast. What are some things that we can offer parents that you've got going on?
Yeah, it's pretty universal. Actually, we have some dads in the mindful parenting course. That's That's a wonderful, when parents can take it together, the mindful parenting course kind of walks people through how to establish their own mindfulness practice, all those inner stuff, how to take care of their big feelings, because we know that our kids are terrible at doing what we say and great at doing what we do. So
Right.
how to model, and then being a little calmer, having our stuff together, and then what to say so that we can move away from ordering and threatening and parent more, from influence, which is in the end is much more effective. So the mindful parenting course is a great course that provides a whole year of support. But if people are interested in checking things out, I have a little mini course for 5 simple things you can do to be less irritable at your child that anyone can take for free over on the website. And and these are so important because I don't know, I feel like you and I are part of this wave of people, like we're changing things, right? We're just like, the way we were raised is not the way we want to do it. And we want to have good relationships with our kids. We don't want to use the old paradigm of fear and I'm excited for what's to come, with that.
Absolutely. No, I'm super excited for it. And so, people, I'll throw in the caveat though, like I was kind of raised in this way. Like I neglected it though. I took it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But now I'm like, oh wow, this is pretty crazy how it takes a generation of influence and it takes a couple generations for that influence to actually show up. Right. Like, cause if we go back and we say, go back to the 60s and the 70s, and that influence, that mindfulness influence, that all that stuff is showing up a generation later. My mom was totally hippie, right? Like, so but when she would be like, you've got to be aware, you've got to do this. I'm like, I am aware. Look at me. I'm not bumping into any walls. Right. Like, now, 30 years later, I'm like, oh, what you meant was be internally aware. Right. So there were a couple key phrases and lessons that were left out. But again, I think that a lot of times that, there's I'm a fan of Abraham Hicks. I'm not sure if you've ever listened to her online, but we learn from experience, not necessarily from words. So we kind of there are some things that we kind of have to, we don't necessarily have to put our hand on the plate to know that it's hot, but we can confirm that it's hot after we put our hand on the plate. Right. So, I mean, I think some of it's almost unavoidable, honestly.
What you mean, like our mistakes and our challenges? Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. We all have to learn the same stuff sort of all over again.
Right. I mean, there's only so much we can get from watching the video. Like you were talking, I'm not going to learn how to play tennis by watching the video. I'm not going to learn how to play tennis by listening to the podcast. I'm going to actually have to go out and play tennis.
Yeah. Make an intention. So it sounds like you were raised in a more kind of conscious way. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, which may have actually, it's hard to know without actually reaching out there and be like, hey, were you doing some of this on purpose? Or was it being I think 20, 30 years ago, she was following her quote, following her bliss. And I would get upset, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Right. And now I'm like, well, I guess I can respect that now, and so, and we can't always explain to our children the depth of everything, that we can't give them a life of experience behind our even a 10-minute quip. We're like, hey, this is everything behind that, and this is why you should do what I'm doing, right? Because they'll never know that. They can't. We can't pack our life into a 15-minute anything to our children.
And it's hard, as parents too. If we're trying to parent. If we're trying to parent in a way that's more where we're not necessarily using punishments and timeouts and threats and all those things, even your mom, even more so maybe, but even now we're against the tide, we're against the tide of history where it was all very top down kind of thing. And And we don't realize some of the problems with that. I don't think like there's so much, we have just in our society, like there's so many people who don't feel accepting of themselves. There's all these adolescents, like there's tons of rebellion. There's lots of unhappy relationships. There's all these things happening. And I really think that like when we look at like even adolescents, like I think that they're not rebelling against. I don't think adolescent rebellion is necessarily a needed and natural thing that some people think it's inevitable. It's an inevitable thing. I think that adolescents are actually rebelling against the discipline tactics that their parents are using, because there's now generations of kids who've been raised like who with more skillful means, who don't necessarily have this huge separation and this sense of, I hate you kind of governs, that they don't have that those kind of things
Right.
with their parents. Because we're starting to turn it around, and we can start to realize that it's actually more effective to parent from a way that helps our kids make the right choice because of internal motivation, because make the right choice because they care about how their actions affect you, rather than I'm going to make this choice now while you're looking because I'm afraid of what you're going to do to me. And then I'm going to go around and make a different choice later, or
Right.
I'm going to lie to you about the choice I made.
That's murder, right? And that's
you know what I
murder.
mean?
When you catch your kids doing that, is that not murder? Like, what just happened there? Right? We want them to have it be driven internally. Definitely, absolutely. I love that though. And trying to get them to see that they're doing good things for the sake of good, not necessarily because they're not going to get yelled at. Like, we don't want to be fear driven. We don't want them to be feel like they're going to get in trouble, right? Like, there's no trouble for what you just did. Again, this kind of goes back to the good choices bit with the cat, right? Like, make good choices, but if you don't make the right choice in that, you're going to need more experience in that scenario, right? Hey, here's what maybe you could have done in that scenario. And same thing with the parents. And again, I think a lot of it comes down to us, and our reactions. And we work on these responses, right? I'm a big fan of the positive opposites, right? Where like, here's what we don't want our kid to do. So then we got to think, what is it we want them to do?
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, I catch myself doing it all the time. Like, hey, get your feet off the table. I mean, put your feet on the floor, right? So, because you don't want to, what we focus on is what they're going to do, right? So if we say table, all they hear is table. They're like, my feet are on the table. I love them here. Like, so, but if we say put your feet on the floor, they're going to hear floor. At least we hope. Like, I mean, that's the gist of it.
Well, it's interesting because the skillful communication is trickling into a lot of different areas. Recently, we were at the art museum and we saw a sign on the wall, and it had the sort of like hand with the cross out, like don't touch symbol, but it said, instead of saying don't touch, it said touching damages the artwork. And I was like, that's so brilliant. It's giving information. It's because this is more effective. It works with all ages, that it's more effective to give information than to just be like, do this, don't do that. Right. Like we can use these things. And it's hard though, because it may not be something we are necessarily taught. We may think, oh, okay. So it's almost like if it's not the way you grew up, for me anyway, it was like learning a new language. Like, it's kind of like learning Chinese to learn. Like, for me, it was like so hard to learn to speak from an I message rather than an you message. Right. And to listen and to figure out whose problem, who had a problem in this moment, and how to solve problems without one person just, how to solve problems so everyone's needs are met. Like, this is like learning a new language. So it's hard. And it's not our fault, I think, as parents, that it's hard. Like the whole thing about like parenting being instinctive and natural is like this super damaging lie, because maybe it is for like the first couple of months, but generally it's all what you were taught, what your society does, all that stuff. So for us, that lie keeps us from kind of getting, if we want to turn things around, kind of getting the help we need to do that.
Right. We're letting that sounds like, letting that lie just kind of keep us from learning. Right.
Yeah.
Be like, well, this is supposed to come naturally. So I don't understand why I need to listen to this, or why should I listen to that? This is just supposed to be natural. So my natural responses are correct. Right. I mean, so I don't need you. I get it. It's tough. And nobody, and one of the biggest things about, what we're talking about too is like habit changes, right? Catching yourself in these reactionary moments is a habit change. And nobody wants to admit that, like, the way I've been doing things all these years is wrong.
Yeah, no,
that sucks.
That can be really hard.
Right.
There's a training I do about in the mindful parenting free training that I do about why your kid doesn't listen to you. And it's hard to hear, it's hard to hear like, oh, this is actually how this sounds to my, so I put the parents in the position of the child and ask them to sort of hear how things sound and how they feel and how they react to that.
Well,
And
what would one of those be? What would an example be?
So for instance, let's say you're Brandon, let's imagine, or in the listener, let's imagine you're like a 6-year-old kid, right? And you come in and you've dropped your jacket in the middle of the hallway and you're just onto something else. You're playing with whatever.
Right.
And you didn't think about it. And I come in and I say to you, I just want you to imagine from the point of view of that 6-year-old kid just playing with something. How do you feel when I say to you, pick that up right now?
Right. I'm like, well, I'm busy. I'm doing things.
Yeah. It's like an order, right? Like, pick that up right now. Like, we're just kind of like, hey, like, that's rude. Like, we tend to, when we go through this, we tend to have resistance to orders, just because all humans kind of have resistance to orders. If you're not in the military, like we just tend to not like people to order us around. We don't like it as adults. Kids don't like it as, kids. So we can actually kind of step back and say, well, how would I ask someone to pick up their jacket if it was like my respected, friend or whatever? Like the way we habitually talk to kids tends to be kind of rude. We yell at kids to not yell, and we
right. Stop yelling. Right.
And then we wonder why, what's going on. So there's some of the ways that we have as a society, ways of communicating with kids. It isn't that effective, kind of innately not that effective.
Right.
But then, so that's that sort of skillful communication piece. But without that sort of, how do we become less reactive piece? How do I get that place to pause and respond more skillfully piece? Like, because the truth is, like, you can learn all these wonderful things to say, and then as soon as your stress response happens, that's all out the window, right? You need to take care of that biological stress response. That's why it's so important.
Right. Well, again, it's definitely a muscle that you build, right?
Yes.
And you were talking earlier about like being so hard on ourselves.
Oh,
right?
That's such a problem.
And how we can be hard on ourselves. And so I'm going to turn that into, we're kind of like an all or nothing society, right? And be like, well, that didn't work for me. I tried it 2 times and it's out the window, right? So would you go ahead and challenge somebody to keep up with it, right? Would you say, listen, it's going to be hard. There are going to be days where you miss. There's going to be days that you fail at this. But if you fail today, try it again tomorrow. Is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. And what tends to happen for people is parents come into my mindful parenting course and they've been parenting a certain way, and then their child has a habit of resisting their orders and threats and things like that because they're trying to save face. They're trying to there's a habit of resistance. And so that's kind of that habit of resistance is kind of like a train that's going 90 miles an hour in one direction. Or we're trying to take that train and move it completely around in the other direction. And it takes time for the train to stop. It takes time for the train to turn around, right? We can't just turn things around right away. It's interesting because parenting mindfully takes a lot more effort and intention in the beginning. It takes time to do that. But what's cool about it is that it snowballs more easily. So like what happens is that when you parent with threats and orders and punishment, you have to up it all the time. Like you have to have more intense threats. You have to yell louder. You have to, all that stuff. And when you start to parent in such a way so that you learn to parent in such a way so that your kids cooperate from the inside out, it actually gets easier and easier and easier over time, rather than harder and harder and harder, because your kids are used to you hearing them and respecting their needs, and they're used to like generally cooperating with you because you're not a jerk about it.
Right on. Very cool. Well, thanks for this first section of it. We're going to I know we kind of ran a little long on the early conversation. Nobody's fault. It's been an enjoyable conversation for sure. I want to flip it over into fatherhood real quick here. What would you say the purpose of fatherhood is?
Well, that's a deep and interesting question that I was unprepared for. Let me see. The purpose of fatherhood. I mean, I don't know. Fathers, obviously there's that general purpose of like being there for our kids. But I don't know. I think with fathers, there's a real need to model how a man should be in this world, like to model how to be present, how to interact in this world, to show the full range of what fatherhood means, like the full range of being a human being, and not just the sort of old school I walk home from work and I'm going to let's go play ball, son, but just to model that full range of it's okay to have all our feelings. I respect you as you are, and this is how we act in the world. And to be, I don't know. It's interesting. I think it's more like, who we are as humans, right? It's the same for moms as it is for dads. It's like fathers need to be present for their own needs and joys and wants in this world, and to model how to take care of those, and to balance that with having those healthy relationships, which are the things that really give us the most fulfillment and joy in life.
I love it. Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit about your father at the beginning. Sounds like you two had a decent relationship. What was the relationship like with your father, and what is something that he did that you do now you find yourself doing now as a parent?
Well, my father is this intense guy. He's an artist, and he, I think, is a highly sensitive person as well. But he was raised in a different time where that was completely unacceptable, and so I think he has a lot of suffering from that. But what he's amazing at, he's a little bit of a roller coaster of emotions too, but what he's amazing at is his enthusiasm and his intense support and love, and showing that and saying that. So he would also have an intense rage, but also he had an intense love and intense support, and he was like my number one cheerleader in a lot of ways, and he taught me to question the world and to be a free thinking person, and that's amazing. And he still is growing and learning. And that's an inspiration to me.
I love that. Absolutely. And we want to be able to see that. I love hearing that he's older, and you're still visibly watching him grow and learn as his child. I didn't have a father growing up, so it's always interesting to hear how somebody's father plays a role in their lives, and my father not being in my life played a huge role, but given all the circumstances, in a positive way. So it always works out. It's always just interesting to hear how somebody else's is.
Yeah, he continues on through you, like you're his continuation. I think that we tend to think of ourselves as so separate, but we are this line of continuation of life. And I think that's important to remember, that, part of our parents are in us, like our fathers are in us, our mothers are in us, and all our teachers are they make who we are. And so this they're never that far away. They're always inside of us in some way.
I like that. Never that far away. For sure. Well, I'm assuming too that you seem to have a vast amount of knowledge. You studied a lot of Buddhism. and some other mindfulness techniques and quite a bit. Is there any book or any media really that you would refer somebody to that has had a huge impact on the way you parent?
There's so many good ones. One that on the way I parent in particular, I think that I'm going to give you two things.
Sure.
One, a real incredible resource for mindfulness and to help you in that way is Real Happiness by Sharon Salzberg. It's a book, and here it is. Real Happiness, and she really breaks it down in a really beautiful way. And then a book that's influenced me on parenting enormously, and it's such an incredibly great book on skillful communication, is Parent Effectiveness Training, or PET. And it's by Dr. Thomas Gordon. It's from like 1970 something, but it's really great, and I think it's very down to earth and straightforward.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for sharing those. Is there something parenting related that you think we should have hit on that we didn't?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Just, I guess maybe, filling that, keep putting those deposits in the relationship bank account, right? Like continuing to think about, putting those deposits in so that when we need to withdraw, there's something in there, right? We can't withdraw from a deficit. We've got to keep, when my girls were little, I would say, I have to fill your kiss tank. And I would fill it all up. And now that my oldest daughter's 11, I can't fill her kiss tank anymore. Sad. But we can go playing mini golf.
That's cool. I mean, look, that's, I think at a certain point, like those kisses turn into something else that you do together, right?
Yes. Exactly, they do.
Very cool. And where should we send people to find out more about you and what you're doing?
They can go to mindfulmamamentor.com or mindfulmamapodcast.com, but everything's there at mindfulmamamentor.com, and there's that free course under resources, and there's the podcast and the blog and the mindful parenting course. You can see if it's enrolling soon.
Very cool. Well, I have had a blast doing this conversation, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. Thank you for the work you do, Brandon. This is great, and I can't wait to have you on my podcast.